I know I came to a meeting somewhere downtown here when people were discussing buying the house and the land, and there was a lot of excitement about it, and I was not excited about it at the time. I just didn't know exactly what people were up to, and so I listened politely. And women from the some of the women were there, and some of them I knew, and some other people I knew were here, and I just sort of said, "Oh, I'll keep an eye on it and see what happens." So that was early on in the timing of the whole project, and people were taking donations, and I do not believe that I donated.
Were you an activist at the time?
I've always been an activist. I was doing some things with SANE, and I covered some of the arrests of some of the Grady's, whom obviously you have come into contact with, up at in Connecticut. I went up there and covered that story for the Ithaca Times. And I think at one point what I was disappointed in was that it seemed to be a Christian movement, and yet half the people I knew who were involved in anti-nuclear stuff were Jewish. And when I brought that to people's attention, they said, "Oh, but we're all inclusive." I said, "No, you're not." And so that sort of kept me at a little distance, because I wanted it known that there were many Jewish people involved in the anti-war movement and the anti-nuclear stuff. But anyway, I was doing a lot of writing then, and I covered that story for the Ithaca Times. I've always been a freelance writer, and anything that interests me I write about.
What made you decide to go ahead and get involved with the encampment?
My friend and I, Janet Braun-Reinitz, who is an artist, and I decided to go up to see what was happening. And so we drove up to the encampment, and Janet had been an activist marching for civil rights. She was in jail at some point. Anyway, she was much more outspoken and out there than I was. So anyway, we went up to the encampment, and we kind of joined a group. They were having a meeting, and the thing that struck us was it was one of these meetings where the person that could sit the longest got to do what she wanted. I mean, as consensus worked in those days. So anyway, so Janet and I listened, and we were quite taken with a lot of the stuff that was going on. So we drove back to Ithaca, and we had lunch at Hal's Deli, and over our corned beef sandwiches we're saying, well, now if we did a demonstration, what would it look like? So Janet said, well, it's got to be it's got to be attractive physically. And I said, and it's got to be an attention getter. And so we worked this, well, what would we call it? Well, if we're going to have an attractive demonstration, what would that look like? So we said, well, how about hats and gloves and white gloves and dresses, as opposed to what everybody else was doing. And that sort of struck us as funny at the time. And what would we call it? Well, we're going to be, well, what are we going to be? We're going to be tasteful. We're going to be Tasteful Ladies for Peace. So that's how we, over corned beef sandwiches, that's how we decided what we were going to do. And she went home, and I went home, and we talked it up, and then we figured, well, we ought to have a meeting at the house. And so we invited, I guess about 20 of our friends, and of course the person we wanted most of all was Alice Cook. Alice, as long as as Alice was alive, I felt the world was making some progress. She was absolutely an incredible speaker, woman, doer, activist. She was everything that I think all of us wanted to be, only more so. And Alice thought this was a great idea. And Connie Cook was in on it, and just a whole lot of people that we respected. However, one of my friends said, Tasteful Ladies for Peace, does that mean the rest of us are distasteful? And we said, no. That's what is distasteful is the war, and distasteful is the nuclear power struggle. So anyway, one of my friends wanted to call it the Upstate Ladies for Peace, and we did that for a little while, but it never resonated with either of us. So we went back to Tasteful Ladies for Peace. We just thought that was much more fun. And there was a cheese shop up on next to Mayor's Smoke Shop then, and we made up cards for people who could not attend, and they stopped in the cheese shop and they signed their cards. And Janet picked up a silver tray, some flea market. So we knew that we would put these cards on a silver tray, and then we started doing some publicity stuff. And I wrote a letter to Miss Manners to ask her, a few things about how one should conduct oneself at a proper demonstration. And she wasn't in the country at the time, so she didn't answer. So that was my lead off for the article that I sent out to the Rochester Democrat Chronicle. Miss Manners did not answer, but the Tasteful Ladies for Peace are going ahead anyway. And I was surprised that many months later, Miss Manners used to have a column in the paper, and someone had written in about a tasteful demonstration, and she answered that. And I know that it was a takeoff on my original, but anyway, that was fine with me. And she definitely liked the idea of the hats and gloves and fussiness of it. And then we decided, well, Tasteful Ladies, we're going to wear high heels, and we don't march if we wear high heels, so we decided we needed cars, and they should be driven by men in three-piece suits. And so we gathered a bunch of willing men, husbands, friends, you name it, we got them. In fact, the reporter from the Democrat and Chronicle came on to drive one of the cars. And we started at the Women's Peace Encampment, but instead of just driving straight over, we went around and came back the other way. I also had written a letter to the commander asking him to join us for tea, and his publicity person wrote back, and I met him a long time afterwards, and he said, we were really worried. We had no idea what you women were going to do. I mean, it was just out of their range of, what had already been happening. And so there were, I think, about 50 of us that gathered at the Women's Peace Camp. And we drove around the long way. And as we drove around, we noticed that there were a lot of guys up in their towers, and they were pointing at us. And we got to the Peace Camp, to the Seneca Army Depot. And of course, the gates were locked. And they were standing behind the gates, and we were in front of the gates. And Alice gave her very short, very pointed talk about why we were standing here dressed as we are. And it harkened back to women getting the vote, where ladies would march and show that they were proper women eligible to vote. I think people took it in good fun. I mean, it was fun. We, and I think that one of the things I felt about the women's movement in general, it lacked a sense of humor. And I have, kind of an offbeat sense of humor, and I think it's really important in any situation. I mean, not if a gun is staring me in the face, but even then, maybe, who knows? With a little humor, maybe you can disarm someone. And I felt that certainly the women involved in it had a great time. We just thought it was fun to do this, and we thought that we had made a statement that was serious, and the two had didn't detract. One did not detract from the other, and the fact that Alice Cook was our spokeswoman was just perfect. I mean, here she was in her at least late 70s, maybe even 80s by then. And I mean, she had always been an incredible activist. And our feeling was, Alice says it's good. And she liked the humor in it. And oh gosh, there were just so many wonderful women that joined us. And we also carried this plant, the Mother of Thousands, and we handed that over to and they took it from us, and they also took the platter, the silver tray with all the names of the women who couldn't make it, and we gave that to them. At one time we were thinking about climbing the fence, but then we looked at our high heels and said, I don't think so. And in fact, we had some lawyers on hand if we had gotten arrested. Yeah, we had made plans for that, but once we saw that fence and looked at our shoes, we said, don't think so. Yeah, there was a cadre of people who were protesting the protesters. Yes, I think that at every demonstration they always had people out there, and they didn't quite know what to make of this. I mean, who are these screwballs coming over? But now there was a woman who came to Ruth from Waterloo, I think her name was, and she came to every demonstration as an anti-demonstrator, and she was always dressed in army fatigues. And Alice, and oh yes, we were carrying flags because we felt that, and this was Alice's take on it. She said, basically, damn it, the flag belongs to everybody, and they're not going to take it away from us. And so our cars had flags on them. We all carried little flags. So there we were, hats. And in fact, Alice hadn't worn a hat in probably 40 years. I brought up from my father's house, I brought up all the hats that my mother had, and I gave Alice one of them, little hat. And so we all had hats, and I also found a bunch of white gloves. We all had white gloves, and Alice turned to Ruth from Waterloo, waving her flag, and Ruth was also waving her flag. And Alice said to her, I'm sure that there are many things that you and I can agree on, and one of them is love for our country. And Ruth of Waterloo was totally disarmed and said, yes, you're right. And then they had this little private conversation, and it ended by Ruth giving Alice her flag and Alice giving Ruth her flag. And then we all repaired to the diner for tea. And we had been there and alerted the owners that we were going to come for tea. And indeed, we had tea and cookies, and we all came back feeling just wonderful. Yes, in fact, a number of people from the camp came. Yeah.
And did you get a feeling of what women at the camp felt when you got back?
I think that they were maybe a little annoyed with us in the beginning, but on the other hand, it was, what can I say? It was a really great demonstration, and I think it cemented some friendships there. My older son was in, I guess he was working or in college. I don't remember, but his then girlfriend was in North Carolina. And she called up and said, Doug, I saw your mom on TV. Because this thing went all over the place. It was, radio stations picked it up, newspapers picked it up, and the video TV stations picked it up. And it was just fun. And we got the word out that no matter how you're dressed, the story is the same. That you should not be sending weapons over to Europe. But it was hilarious, and we felt very invigorated, excited about what we had done, and it worked.
And you,
Demonstration like that the timing has to be right. It's just a moment. And in fact, we thought about organizing another demonstration, and we couldn't get the excitement going, so we dropped it. Alice and I used to swim up at Teagle in the morning, a master swim, and so there were a bunch of us naked ladies in the shower room, and I said, Alice, what do you think about Tasteful Ladies for Choice? Great idea. And so we got dressed and did Tasteful Ladies for Choice, and it was out here on the Commons, and Janet had made a huge Statue of Liberty that I had in my garage for many years until it fell apart. I was part of a group of 3 women who did a book. I was the last person called in on it. There were 2 women artists in Syracuse who got together with the other writer who called me and said that she had talked to Alice about getting a writer for this project, and Alice said, oh, call Bryna. And so that's how I got involved. But anyway, they all came down to my little office, and we talked about what this book was going to look like. And Elaine and I worked on our end of it together, and the other women were collecting photographs and drawings and artwork. And Temple University Press was interested in it. In fact, they gave us a contract. And the book came out, I guess, in '87, something like that, yeah. And that was it. Let's put it this way. The 2 writers got along famously. The 2 artists got along very well. We didn't mix, and that was too bad. I needed Alice Cook, yes. Yes. And Alice was so happy that she had recommended me.
But in retrospect, are you glad that the book exists?
Yes, I am. I am very glad that the book exists, yes. And yeah, for whoever looks at it, it's interesting that it shows a lot about the encampment, and yeah, so I think in that sense it was a necessary thing. I probably would have done it differently, and so would everybody else. But I also have to say, as for myself, I do write, and I do write books, and I've had 3 collaborations on books, and I think collaborating is really an art that I have not yet mastered. It can be difficult just because people are excited about what they're doing, and they have an idea here and you have an idea here, and then you get together and find out, well, that's not at all what I thought. So it can be difficult.
Did you consider yourselves an affinity group?
Yes, definitely. Let's see, both Janet and I had young kids around. She was a single mom by that time. Yes, her husband had died, and we had other things going on in our lives, so it never occurred to us that we would go there and live there for any period of time. And we were close enough to drive up there on occasions. In fact, the day that the encampment opened, my daughter was maybe in college, and I said to her, "You have to come with me." It was a great event going to the opening, and I said, "This is really history, and you want to be part of it." And so she came with me, and it was just an amazing experience to go on, to see women together going on that march, and excluding men. That was really wonderful, and I thought it was really neat how people said to the guys, "Sorry, this is not your turf right now." And
why did you particularly like that?
Because guys tend to want to take over. Oh, you're not doing it right. You ought to do it this way, and women would tend to back off a little. In this way, nobody was backing off, and it was just a very exciting moment. The camera's rolling, the excitement. There was just this grand feeling of, hey, we're doing something positive, and we're doing something wonderful, and this is it. I'm happy to say that all of my kids are activists in their own way. Well, first of all, I think it's a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get with your kids. But second of all, I think that if you include your kids in some of the things that you think are appropriate for them, that they will get the message that what you're doing is important, and they will meet other people who agree. They will meet a lot of people who won't agree, and they'll have a chance to sift through themselves and see what they want to do. And, you know, we lucked out. There was a lot of publicity in the local paper. A lot of bad publicity, a lot of good publicity. But I remember when I went into the Ithaca Journal with the first press release, one of the more outspoken people there sort of made fun of me and the women's encampment in general. A bunch of women, what are they going to do? Da, 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 you know, that sort of thing. And he was very down on the whole thing. He just did not think it was appropriate, an appropriate way to get anything done. There was a disagreement there. And the letters that came in, you know, the usual suspects wrote the anti-encampment letters, and the usual suspects wrote the pro-encampment. And there were some wonderful stories that came out. I think one of the reasons that our demonstration got so much publicity, and good publicity, was because there were only 3 of us talking. It was Janet, Alice Cook, and myself, and we kept it that way. And sometimes I think what happened at the peace encampment is, well, anybody could talk, and anybody could say anything they wanted, which sometimes helped and sometimes did not. You know, it was, I mean, this was really a unique experiment. It was what it was, and good and bad, and some really amazing liaisons came out of it, I think. Particularly I think there was an Amish or a Mennonite across the way that were living there, and they really did object to the women up on the roof in the nude. And they had a discussion, and they came to a really good understanding, because basically the 2 groups were against the same thing. And so once they both calmed down and discussed it, I think that it was an interesting alliance that was formed there. I used to drive by the encampment every so often, going somewhere. I don't remember where. It's not a usual drive for me, but sometimes we'd head out there, and I know that they certainly wanted it to be a place where women could continue to go and grow, and that was pretty interesting, but I don't think it held up. Again, it's the moment that something happens. It's either the right moment or it's not, and that is really in the middle of nowhere. I don't really think so. I think that was a decision made way higher up. I'd like to think it did, but I don't. I'm too practical to believe that. There are still a few of us around. If there were a cause that caught my eye, I could gather at least probably 10 or 15 of us together. Unfortunately.